Hi, welcome to Tenor Banjo from Scratch, Lesson 3. So we learned our C, F and G chords. We also learned how to make our G into a G7 and our C into a C7, and we tried a different rhythm and we played a 12-bar blues in the last lesson. In this lesson, we're going to consider the rest of this neck, because up until now we've only been playing in the first 3 frets, and there's a lot more stuff to do up here. The good news is that the tenor banjo's tuning is wonderfully symmetrical. It means that when we learn something in one place, we can move it to another place, and we'll find that little shapes move up and down and across the fingerboard to create new chords quite easily. Once we've got these chords a little bit further up the neck, we can simply slide them up and down the neck to find lots of other chords. In this lesson, we're going to learn 3 different ways we can play the same chord, the chord of C. We're going to learn 3 shapes, all for the chord of C. In fact, we already know one, our open C chord down there. But in order to think about them, we have to know a little bit of music theory. Now, don't be worried about this, but it helps us understand how these different positions work. The chord of C, and in fact any major chord, is made up of 3 notes. The first, third and fifth steps of the major scale. So if I play a C major scale, and don't worry about this at all, you know this sound. If you've ever seen The Sound of Music, you know the sound of do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That's a major scale. I'm playing the scale of C major. So if I take the first note, the third note and the fifth note, that will give me the notes that make the chord of C major, or C as we tend to just call it. First note, not the second note. Third, not the fourth. Fifth. We end up with these 3 notes. And if I rearrange those notes on the fingerboard into a place where I could make a chord out of them, I end up with, well, I could use that C chord shape that we learned before, because that's just the notes of C, G, E and another C. I just took my C, E and G and mixed them up and found a place on the fingerboard where I could play them. Notice one of the notes is repeated, and that's because, well, 3 notes in a chord, 4 strings. It would be very difficult if we had to somehow keep avoiding hitting one of the strings. So we simply duplicate one of them so we can strum all 4 strings. Now, because there are 3 notes in a major chord, we can play it where the first note of our scale is the highest note of the chord. But we could also play it so that the third note of the scale is the highest note of the chord. And we could play it so the 5th note of the scale is the highest note of the chord. So all of those are the same chord. They're all just a collection of C's, E's and G's. I'll show you those 3 forms. We're going to call them Form 1, Form 3 and Form 5. Now that seems a bit odd. Where's 2 and 4? Well, we're not just numbering them, we're naming them after which note of the scale is the highest note of the chord. And that's a really useful thing to do, because when you start wanting to make melodies with these chords, you can find that you could do something like this, for example. I haven't changed chord, but I've managed to make this thing happen on the top string. And that's how we start to make our banjo arrangements really sound interesting and exciting. Here are the forms. Form 1, with the first note of the scale as the highest note, you already know it's a C chord down here, and there's the C right on the top on the first string. Here's C in the next position. Now, some of these chord shapes will seem a bit tough at first. They often use bigger stretchers and they're going to be using your little finger, so they will take a bit of time to get them to sound clean. Don't try and overcompensate by squeezing really, really hard. Just try and find a comfortable position for your hand. This is how this one looks. Index finger on the 4th string, 4th fret. Then our second finger is actually going to hold down both of the next 2 strings, the 2nd and 3rd string, at the 5th fret. So I'm sort of bending my first joint back a little bit in order to squash it over those two. And then my little finger goes on the 7th fret on the string nearest the floor. Now that's a bit of a finger buster when you're first starting. Especially getting that finger to flatten out a little bit. That'll take some playing with the angle of your hand. Don't go and make your hands sore. Just do it little and often, and eventually it'll start to sound cleaner. You could play it with 4 fingers and use 2 fingers there, but it's a bit difficult to get to. It's not really much better, and it's going to make it more difficult to change chords later. So it's best to try and persevere with that one if you can. So that's also the chord of C. So practice going backwards and forwards between the open C that we learned before and this C. And your hand will eventually start getting used to going to that shape. Now there's only one more chord form we need because there are only 3 different notes we can have on the top of this chord. We've done 2 of them. For the last one, what we're going to do is we're going to put our index finger on the 7th fret of the 4th string. We're going to put our ring finger on the 9th fret of the 3rd string, and our little finger is going to hold down both the 1st and 2nd strings at the 10th fret. Now if you look at that shape for a moment, does it look familiar? Well, if you were to slide that all the way down the neck until your index finger fell off, it's an F chord. Now our F chord we could do with just 2 fingers, but there's also the option of bringing in our ring finger on the 3rd fret of the 1st string for an F chord. But it's still based on that same shape. You'll see a lot of this happening. Shapes that we've seen somewhere before being reused. So here we go. That's our form 5 because it has the 5th step of the scale on the top. You don't have to dive in and start doing all of those at the same time. Maybe break it down into little tasks like practice going from form 1 to form 3, like this. When you can do that, maybe go backwards and forwards between form 3 and form 5. And when you can do that, see if you can do all 3. Now, it might seem crazy learning all of that just to play the chord of C. But the great thing is, that's actually not just the chord of C. Those 3 shapes will let us play every major chord, and we can pick out which note we want to be on the top, either form 1, form 3 or form 5. How do we do that? Well, we've cheated a little bit by having our first one as an open chord. Let's try doing the whole thing that we just did, but 2 frets higher. Well, that's easy for these ones. We just find that and move it up 2 frets, and we just find that and move it up 2 frets. But what about this one? Well, this is going to be our kind of true form 1. We're going to replace the nut with our index finger. We're going to do it at the 2nd fret now, but we could do it at any fret. Let's do it at the 2nd fret. Hold that one down across the strings and put your ring finger and little finger, imagining that this is the nut and you're just playing your C chord shape. Now that bar all the way across, you don't actually have to hold all 4 strings, so you could sort of focus the pressure that you're putting on towards the tip of your finger, just to hold down the lowest 2 strings. Okay. That now is, because that was a C, we've moved it up 2 steps. 1 step would be C sharp or D flat. The 2nd fret, we now have a D chord. And it's a D chord, form 1, because the first note, the D, is right there on the top. We can then use the same other 2 shapes, both of them 2 frets higher, to play 2 more D chords. Now it'll take a bit of time to find your way around the fingerboard, and you will keep getting lost, and you'll probably start doing things like this and getting the wrong ones. Don't worry about that, just take your time and do it slowly. Now don't worry about this, it's going to take some time to get this to stick. So take your time with it, use a metronome and do things like little exercises like set your metronome going and go, I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4 and then form 3 and then form 5 and then form 3. Just working your way up and down the neck. And when you're really comfortable with that, try doing it everything up 2 frets, and then you'll be playing 3 different forms of a D chord. Keep practicing, and I'll see you in lesson 4. Bye.